Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. I'm a Puppy-Sensei VTuber, and I make Japanese content to help you level up your Japanese skills. It's really the holiday season now, isn't it? Christmas is right around the corner. I already know exactly what I want for the holidays. What I'm dreaming of? I just want to make people smile. If I can do that, then I already have everything I could want. It sounds a bit cringe, doesn't it? I don't mind. Cringe is culture, and I'm here for it. I'm a very emotion little dog, and I'm always happy that I get to be who I am with all of what I am. This week we're going to be discussing case marking particles in Japanese. For me, this is a very interesting topic because personally I find Japanese grammar to be a bit tantalizing. But I'm a nerd when it comes to linguistics related matters, so I'm aware that really, this is probably more of a frustrating topic for some people. I've talked before about how I think wa and ga are super slippery. There's so many minuscule and sometimes really befuddling little edge cases that make these two particles, particularly, really difficult to use accurately. We'll look at some of those examples today and some stuff, but yeah, I think maybe we should just get into it. Ikimashou! That's not ominous at all. Puppy-Koi, are you alright, buddy? Weird. I hope that's not foreshadowing something terrible. Okay, case marking particles. Let's talk about this. Does Japanese have cases? Yes. Sort of. Technically. I really don't want to get into the weeds on this because I could go into this huge lecture about Japanese linguistics and it really wouldn't be too terribly helpful for anyone. Whoa! Manager-sama! Rude? Well, yeah, okay. Hey! Okay, so when we think about cases in languages, what we're usually thinking about are things like declension. Those are changes to nouns or pronouns or things like that. Russian, for example, has this incredibly robust system of cases that require you to change the way nouns sound based on who did what to whom and things like that. So, what do we know about nouns in Japanese, Manager-sama? Well, yeah, nouns in Japanese don't change because they tend to be written in kanji. Or, well, backwards. They're written in kanji because they don't change, but I guess that's like a chicken or egg thingy, isn't it? Doesn't matter. Japanese doesn't have case marking on nouns, not specifically, but that doesn't mean that Japanese lacks cases, since, like, okay, so technically case is a feature of communication, and that isn't necessarily beholden to a specific language per se. I think that... I caught myself. See, I told you, this is a rabbit hole that I could get lost in. Let's just cut to the chase. Puppy-Koi, cue the montage music. Hey, lots of people liked it when I was stuck in that cornfield. Anyway, let's just look at some particles. Wa. Of course. Of course we're starting with wa. Where else would we start? Remember way back when we started and I taught you that the most basic Japanese sentence is an x wa y des sentence? Well, obviously that's the wa that we're talking about here. I know it's been a while, but remember, this hiragana is ha. But when it's used as a particle, it's going to be pronounced wa. Why? Because Japanese is a very cool language that makes sense. So, when and in what situations are we going to use the wa topic marking particle? Quite a few. But here's the very most basic way that we use wa. So, as you see in this grammar point, we often use wa in cases where we're talking about something already. We've already started talking about that, and we're starting a new sentence that simply shares some new information about the topic that we've already been discussing. So, in a case like that, calling it the topic marker actually makes a whole lot of sense for wa, right? Because wa is the thing marking the topic of our discussion, what we've already been talking about. Let's take a look at a sentence and think about this. So, in this example, Puppy-Sensei is saying, Pokemon ga daisuki desu. He really likes Pokemon. And then I'm responding by saying, hontou desu ka? Ichiban suki na Pokemon wa nan desu ka? Which means something like, really? Well, what's your favorite Pokemon? But what I want to highlight here is the use of wa in my sentence. Wa is marking ichiban suki na Pokemon, because we've already established a baseline topic of conversation. We are discussing Pokemon, and since we're continuing that conversation, I'm going to use wa to kind of add new information about the topic that we're already talking about. Now, I want to compare this with our next type of case marking particle. It's ga. So, if we use wa for cases when the topic of the sentence is already known to us, then one of the ways that we're going to use ga is going to be to introduce an entirely new topic of conversation that's otherwise unknown to one or more members of the conversation. Before I go on to the next example, I just want to really hone in on this point and just remind you, this list of particles is not exhaustive. I'm not going to give you every particle, and I'm not going to give you every meaning and every use for every particle. So this isn't the only way that ga is going to be used, just like it's not the only way that wa is going to be used. Okay, that out of the way, let's look at this example sentence for ga. So, in this sentence, I'm remarking to Puppy-Sensei that I find the classroom to have been really cold lately. 教室は最近めちゃめちゃ寒くなったね. And Puppy-Sensei is responding by saying, well, yeah, of course, that's because there's a ghost. だから、幽霊がいるのよ. In Puppy-Sensei's reply, we're using ga because now he's bringing up the existence of the ghost. It's new information to me, right? He's teaching me about the fact that there's a ghost and explaining that that's the reason why it's been so cold lately, because of cold spots. I mean, yes, now I know about the ghost. I know about it now, but when we were talking about this conversation, I didn't know, and that was the example that I was giving. I was giving the example of the time when I didn't know about because the ghost, and now I'm falling apart here. It's okay. Doesn't matter. I'm being very reductive when I say this, but this is my basic feeling about the use of wa and ga. From my point of view, most sentences that use ga to mark the subject of the sentence are going to have their focus on the subject. That will be the emphasis of the sentence. Why is it cold in the room lately? Because there's a ghost. The ghost is the emphasis of the sentence, and therefore ghost is marked with ga. And with wa sentences, the emphasis of the sentence is slightly more edged in the direction of the latter half of the sentence. What's important is what you have to say about the topic. That's a bigger deal than the topic itself. As for your favorite Pokemon, which one is it? I'm bringing up Pokemon because I want to know which one you like. I'm not bringing up Pokemon because Pokemon is a new topic for us. We're already talking about Pokemon. I just want to know which one you like, right? So you can see that in a wa sentence, the focus is on the information that I'm getting after the subject. And in a ga sentence, the focus is on the information that I'm giving or receiving before ga. Again, that's not the whole story. Not by a long shot. But short of doing an entire lesson on just wa and ga, I'm actually going to leave it there so I can talk about some of the other case marking type particles. Now, wa and ga have been difficult to define, as I've shown here so far, but o is actually quite a bit easier to pin down, and we can provide a pretty handy definition for it. It marks the object of the sentence. When we're thinking about grammatical case, o is marking the accusative case, which is really just a fancy way of saying that whatever is marked with o should be considered the direct object of the sentence. Did you just eat something? Well, then the something that you ate would be marked with o because that's what you ate. Were you reading a book recently? Then the book is going to be marked with o because that's what you read. O, as I'm saying, sort of answers the question what it was that the verb acted upon. Example sentence, you bet. Oh, neat. So manager Sama made some... Hold up. Stop. Stop it. This ghost, I swear. Okay, fine. So, yeah, I just wanted one simple sentence, whatever. Now we have, manager-sama wa, mise de katta oishii tonkatsu ramen o tsukutta. Manager-sama made some delicious tonkatsu flavored ramen that was bought at the store. That's a little bit of a mouthful for us in English, isn't it? Well, maybe, but in Japanese, this is actually a relatively ordinary sentence. I'm going to teach you a really quick trick. This will not work every time, but with Japanese, usually but not always, whenever we find something that comes between the ga or the wa particle and the o particle, we can kind of temporarily remove that when we're trying to understand a new sentence. So, this is the very bare bones sentence that we're looking at. Manager-sama wa tsukutta. Manager-sama made something. We don't know what it is that she made because there's nothing marked by o. We don't know what the object of the sentence is, but the base sentence is still there, and we can understand who the doer is, what the verb is, and what the tense is. It's manager-sama. Manager-sama made something, or constructed something, or cooked something, and we know it's in past tense. Again, this isn't entirely and fully reliable, but oftentimes, that part that we had temporarily removed from the sentence will all be part of the object. So, if this entire unit is the object, then using my puppy patented work backward method, we get the noun, we get the type of noun, we get an adjective describing the noun, and then we get a verb giving additional information about the noun that we have described with an adjective and a type. See, each part of the object is really just working to make that object a little bit more specific for us. But in the end, it's all the same object. It's all one thing. And it's being used to tell us what it was that Manager-sama made. In the end, Manager-sama wa ramen o tsukutta. See? We can use particles to reduce our sentences down into easily digestible chunks, right? That makes it a lot easier for us to approach the Japanese language, especially when we have a sentence that's very long or very complex. But yeah, I actually already talked about that in a previous video, so let's leave the object particle behind and move on to the instrument particle. This is de, and we call it the instrument particle in Japanese. But what does that mean exactly? Well, de answers the question, what did you use to do the thing with? So if I typed a message on my computer, what did I use to do the typing? Probably my keyboard. If I ate some rice using chopsticks, then chopsticks are what I used, and so in Japanese, the chopsticks are going to be marked with de. Actually, let's write a sentence similar to this in Japanese so that we can see this in play. Hashi de gohan o tabemashita. Let's look again at exactly what we're seeing here. Breaking this down very carefully, we can see that these are the parts of speech that are in play for a sentence like this. Obviously, the first thing that we notice, there's no subject. But that shouldn't surprise us because Japanese is very happy leaving the subject out when it can be implied. But what is interesting here is that once again, what we've really done is just create a very complex object. The object in this sentence is gohan, which means rice, but it can also just mean a meal. But then the use of the de particle to describe what it is that we're using to eat the rice is really just giving us more information about the rice itself. We're creating a complex object. Hashi de gohan. It's the rice that we ate with chopsticks, right? We're going to see that a lot in Japanese. Many Japanese sentences are built out of some compound subject plus some compound object plus a verb. If you ever feel like you're looking at a Japanese sentence and you're feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of it, my recommendation is just slow down. Start by finding the verb, then try to find the subject if there is one, and then everything between the subject and the verb, that's probably the object and anything that might be modifying it, right? So those are the three parts of a Japanese sentence that you might want to look for when you're trying to break it down and make it more understandable. In my opinion, this de particle, it's fairly easy to use, so I'm not going to give you other examples for it right now. But basically, you can think about this particle as using an object, taking a vehicle, or employing something for some purpose. Think of it as an answer to the question, with what or by what means. So then next, we're going to look at the ni particle. Unfortunately, we're back in tricky territory again. Ni is another one of those particles that can be really difficult to define. Sometimes we use ni to talk about the where or the when that an event happened. I like to define it as in something happened in this place or something happened at this time. But there are other uses of ni, and one of them is to mark the indirect object within a larger direct object phrase. Remember a couple minutes ago when we made that very long object marked with o? Well, sometimes you might have a case where the direct object that's marked with o also needs to be interacting with an indirect object. And in those cases, ni is going to come in handy for us. Let's see an example. 友達は私にピザをくれました. My friend gave me a pizza. That's a dope friend right there. How do you like your pizza? There's really only one wrong answer, and it's fish. In Japan, I often had pizza with corn on it. That's fine. No judgment. Corn, way better than fish. Take note of what we're seeing in this sentence, though. In this sentence, my friend is marked with wa, because they are the topic. I am marked with ni, because I'm the recipient. Pizza is marked with o, because it's the direct object. And then we have the verb, which is kuremashita, which is the past tense of to give. Right? So in this sentence, we have an object being given to the indirect object. I'm an object. These are the cases where we're going to need to use ni. The object is being given to someone else. It's being taken to a place, dropped off, delivered. The recipient is the indirect object, the receiver, and that's what's being marked with ni. However, we actually can also see some similar sentences where the object marked with o is going to be replaced by an object marked with ga. Remember? I told you, ga is really tricky. But let's take a look at why that would be. So in this sentence, Puppy-Sensei wa gakusei tachi ni surprise ga aru nda. We're seeing gakusei tachi marked with ni because they are the recipient of the object, which is a surprise. Do not open until Xmas. Do you see it? The reason that surprise is being marked with ga and not o is because aru is our verb of existence, and that always takes the ga particle. The very basic sentence here is something exists. Nanika ga aru. And what is it that exists? A surprise. And what kind of surprise is it? A surprise for Puppy-Sensei students. Just be patient, okay? I'm excited too. We're seeing the students here marked with ni because they are the recipient of the surprise. Now, you might see this use of ni and think that once again, ni is kind of talking about a location, right? Because I'm giving the surprise to you. And so you might think that you are the direction or the location where the surprise might be landing. And you're right. Ni is very frequently used to mark the location of events and the location of things in space. But ni has a lot of different uses, and we're going to see that ranging from having something to do with something happening at a specific location, just like 2年ぐらい京都に住みました. I lived in Kyoto for 2 years. Actually, I lived in other places in Japan too, but Kyoto was really special to me. So that's the place that I always think of when I'm discussing my time spent living in Japan. It's just like super close to my heart. My puppy heart lives in Kyoto. Anyway, ni here is marking the location of existence. I lived in Kyoto. Another case where we're going to use this ni particle would be to mark a specific time that something happened or is happening. So in the case of this sentence, ni is marking the time that something happened. So here, kodomo no toki ni, at the time that I was a child, takusan chuka ryori o, a lot of Chinese cooking, tabemashita, I ate. Why did I eat a lot of Chinese food as a child? Just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Anyway, as I've said before, ni is frequently used in cases where we're locating things in space and in time. And in these example sentences, that's effectively the indirect object. But there's another important thing about ni that I want to discuss before we move on. And that's the fact that we treat some verbs as requiring an indirect object, and therefore it's marked with ni, even in cases where we actually don't have a direct object. Those verbs are going to include some verbs like kiku, which means to ask someone something. So, 彼女は隣の人に聞きました. Similar to what we've seen before, there's no direct object between the doer of the verb and the verb itself. Instead, we just get the recipient that's being marked with ni. So, have I convinced you yet that ni is super tricky? Want to move on to the next one? No. Of all the particles that we are going to discuss today, no is probably the easiest to use. Handy hints. Number 1, no connects 2 nouns or 2 noun phrases. And number 2, no indicates that the first thing on the list owns the second thing on the list. We're seeing 3 examples here. Puppy-Sensei no kyokasho, the book belonging to Puppy-Sensei. Easy. This makes sense. No is being used here like apostrophe S is in English. It's possessive. So this book is Puppy-Sensei's textbook. In the second example, we have a student of Tokyo University. Todai no gakusei. It's a student that belongs to Tokyo University. I realize that belonging to a university kind of sounds weird in this situation, but it's not really that the Tokyo University owns the student. It's that they are a student who goes to Tokyo University. And so therefore, Tokyo University has some kind of claim or ownership over the individual in question. We do the same thing with jobs. So the place where you work, your company, no shain, an employee of that company, right? That's the format that we're going to use, right? Big thing, university or company, no possessive particle, person, right? Does it make sense? And keep in mind, both of these things are nouns. These are nouns. It's a university and it's a person or a student. Those have to be nouns because that's the only thing that we can connect with no. Now, with the third example, we actually have a string of possessives. And that's going to make this just a tiny bit more complex. But we're basically talking about the room with the food of the puppy. Koinu no tabemono no heya. The room is the most important thing here, and so that's going to be at the end. But this isn't exactly showing ownership, right? The room could care less whether or not it had the puppy's food. It's just that the room is the room in which we have the puppy's food. And so you can kind of think about this like koinu no tabemono, right? That's the puppy's food. And where does the puppy's food belong? It belongs in this room, kono heya, ne? So we get koinu no tabemono no heya, the room with the puppy's food. We can stack these things to infinitely long degrees, just like in this other example. See, here's a sentence with 3 possessive no particles. Manager-sama no kohi no kapu no katachi wa hen desu ne. We're just stringing possessive particles along from one thing to another. It's Manager-sama's coffee. It's the coffee that's in her cup. It's the shape of that cup. In that shape, the shape of Manager-sama's coffee cup is weird, right? What's the topic of our sentence? The topic of the sentence is the weird shape of Manager-sama's coffee cup. And that, we think, is weird. So we're stating that with desu ne, right? It's weird, isn't it? Does all of this make sense? So ultimately, no is going to connect noun, noun, and then maybe other nouns as well. And then with that, we're going to create one big, long noun that we could use as the topic of a sentence, or the object of a sentence, or anything else that we wanted, right? No is pretty easy to use. Think about it like an apostrophe S, or you can think about it as the word of, right? So the shape of the coffee cup. Before we move on to the quiz, I want to talk about 2 more particles, but we're actually going to do them both in one go. So here we see to and ya. Now, first and foremost, I want to remind you that, as I said earlier, particles are not beholden simply to the definitions that I'm giving here. This is not an exhaustive list. It's not an exhaustive list of particles, and it's not an exhaustive list of their uses. This is not the only use of the to particle, and it's not the only use of the ya particle. But I'm just talking here about the way that we use these particles to create longer lists of nouns. So one way that you use to and ya is for making these long lists. Let's see how you use these 2. Papi-ko-ai no suki na tabemono wa mizu to gyunyu to juice desu. Or a similar sentence, Papi-ko-ai no suki na tabemono wa mizu ya gyunyu ya juice desu. In both of these sentences, we're creating lists of the types of things that Papi-ko-ai likes to drink. These are the types of drinks that Papi-ko-ai likes. And by connecting these nouns with to or ya, we're making some kind of long list. We can use to between nouns to create lists of things. And in that case, we're going to translate it the way that we would use and in English, right? To can translate to and. But that's only true if we're using it between nouns. I keep stressing this point. You cannot use to to connect sentences or verbs. Like run and jump. In Japanese, run and jump would be a completely different construction. So the and in run and jump would not be to in Japanese. We'll use something else to connect verbs in this way. To is only for nouns. Great. Okay, we understand to now. So I can create a list of something using noun, to, noun. That's this and that. Kore to sore. This and that. Wonderful. So, what's the difference between to and ya? I personally find this really interesting. To is for closed lists. It's fully inclusive. What does Puppy-Kohai like? In the first sentence, he likes water and milk and juice, and that's it. Don't give him soda. He doesn't like it. It's not one of the nouns that's connected by to on our list. And that list is the complete list. That's the whole thing. This, to, that, that's it. End of list. Nothing else. But in a sentence with ya, the list is not exhaustive. So in a ya sentence, he likes water, and he likes milk, and he likes juice, and he also likes other stuff too. Does he like soda? We don't actually know, because the second sentence doesn't tell us. We just have a list of the ones that we're certain of, right? He likes this, he likes this, he likes this. That's how we're going to use ya. Do you see the difference between ya and to? To is for completed lists. Ya is for only a partial list. This and that, and maybe some other stuff too. I think that's enough about particles for today. Did we hit all of the particles and all of their uses? Nope. No. We didn't even cover all of the case marking particles, really. But that's okay. We'll come back to this another time. Not next week, though. I have something else in mind for our next lesson. Spoiler, it's not adjectives. Anyway, let's take a quiz and test your particle knowledge. Okay, so for today's quiz, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few English sentences, and I want you to think about how you would say those sentences in Japanese. I'm actually going to do each of these in 2 stages. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to try to answer the question fully on your own. If you can come up with a Japanese sentence on your own, then that's wonderful and you're wonderful. And if you can't think of a Japanese sentence on your own, then I'll give you an additional 10 seconds with some multiple choice options. That way you can challenge yourself, but you can also lean on what you do know to help fill in what you don't know. Easy? Let's give it a try. Here's the first one. All right, so to begin with, I want you to try to write this sentence in Japanese on your own. Please use the topic marker wa. If you can get it, that's great. And if not, I'll provide you with some options after. How did you do? Let's try with some multiple choice options now. Would you write this sentence as A, B, C, or D? And of course, the answer is going to be C. Inu wa totemo kawaii desu. Now, is that the only possible answer? No. You might have said something slightly different, and that's okay. This is just the ideal answer that I'm looking for this question. For example, in place of totemo, I often use chou, which means like super much, a whole lot. Language can be variable. Next question. Okay, this one should also be easy because I think you've seen all of these words. If you don't know, Canada in Japanese is just Kanada. So pretty simple. Think about what particles you're using. The only part of this that might be tricky is 3 years ago, but give it a shot and we'll see how you do on your own. How did it go? Let's give it another round with some options this time. So I know I made this one a little bit harder, but I hope that you saw that the answer is D. Why is it D and not A? Because in A, the particle that exists between Canada and the verb is no. And we've learned that using the particle no, it's going to need to fall between two nouns. It can't go between a noun and a verb, and so that would be wrong. So the answer is 3年前 Canadaに住んだ. Right, it's using that ni particle that we talked about today. We're only going to do one more in this format, just a 3-question quiz. But that's because I have something else cooking for you. This could be a hard one. Here are the things that I want you to remember. Who is doing the action, and do we need to specify that? What's the object? What's the time that this might be taking place? If you know these things, you can probably figure out which particles to use. Putting things in the right order isn't as important, but do try to make sure that your particles are right. Give it a go. Do you need some help? Let me give you some options. Take your time. Can you spot the very important reason that there is only one right answer here? The answer to this question can only be A. And why is that? Simple. Because our sentence uses the verb of existence arimashita. That's aru in the past tense. And aru and iru are verbs that only work with the particle ga, right? So you wouldn't use o, you wouldn't use to, you wouldn't use wa, you'd only use ga because we have arimashita. Did I stump you? Okay, so actually that's the end of the quiz, but there is one more thing that I want to ask you to do for me. I'm going to give you homework. Dun, dun, dun! But it's a holiday, you scream in a panic. It's going to be all right. It'll be very easy. All I want you to do is I want you to write a single sentence in Japanese, just one sentence. But it needs to use 3 particles. Do you think you can do that? It can be any 3 particles, even the ones that we learned last time, the sentence ending particles. Put your sentence in the comments. I'll be watching. Do your best, and please don't be afraid of getting it wrong. If you have any Japanese writing support for your keyboard, great, that's fine. Write it in Japanese if you can. If not, it's okay with me if you write it phonetically, right? I'm going to do another lesson in the future where I show you how to change your keyboard setup so that you can write in Japanese, but that's fine. We don't need to worry about that for now. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask me. I'm kind of desperate for engagement, so please comment if you can. If you like this homework style, I'll give it to you more often. In fact, I'll tell you what. If we get just 4 comments on this video, I'll give you more homework next time. Just 4 of you. You can do that, right? For me? For me? 'Cause I love you? Please. Thank you, as always, for coming to enjoy this lesson. It might feel like this lesson was a bit of a retread of things that we've already covered previously, but remember that my personal belief is that really you can never work too hard to hammer down the basics. I personally would rather spend way too much time making certain that you're understanding these simple concepts than I would trying to put on your running shoes before you're ready to run. Slow and steady. If you're carefully following along with my lessons, then we're going to get you there eventually. And speaking from a personal place, I find it's usually better to spend more time than you really think that you need studying these things that may not feel like new ground. Anyway, the point is that I'm thankful for you and for the work that you're doing to try to learn Japanese. And I guess that's appropriate, given that this is a Thanksgiving episode. Sort of, I guess. Huh. Maybe I should have done a lesson on food instead of particles since it's Thanksgiving. Manager-sama, is it okay if I scrap this lesson and do one on food instead? I made her mad. I hope to see you all again soon. For now, I've been XS. Lead with love. Mata ne.